Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today to paint some pumpkins. First I want to show you the paper that I'm using. I'm going to use hot pressed Winsor & Newton watercolor paper. This is professional grade. Whatever you use, just make sure it's 140 pounds or more to hold all the water that we're going to put on it. I'm going to be using the Derwent Paint Pan palette of 24 colors. It's a really convenient palette, comes in this little case, and you get this beautiful array of colors. It's super diverse. And then I'm going to be using a professional grade natural watercolor brush today. It's a size 10. I will share the link below. And the tip is quite aggressive, so you can get some really fine lines using this brush. And finally, here's my color palette, and I'll be calling out the specific colors throughout the tutorial. So I'm going to start out with sketching my pumpkins. You can always look at the final image in this video and feel free to trace the pumpkins that I drew, but I do recommend just trying to draw your own pumpkins, try sketching. If you watch what I do here, you'll see that I kind of measured the area out on my paper, and I'm starting with some very simple shapes, and I'm just stacking some pumpkins on top of each other. You can make these as tall or as short as you want. You could even go buy some pumpkins and look at them and just make it up. It doesn't have to be all that precise. And as I move through the tutorial, I am going to speed up parts of it just to keep it at a half hour so that it's a little bit quicker for you guys to watch. And I'm also going to share the whole part of me sketching all three of my pumpkins, just so that if people want to follow along, they can with that part. But if you feel like you don't need to watch this part, go ahead and fast forward through it. So now that I have my pumpkins sketched out and ready to go, I'm going to start with the wet on wet technique. This is a watercolor technique that I use all the time. It's my favorite one. And essentially what you do is just put clear water on the paper, and you only put it where you want your specific color to go that you're using at that time. So as you can see here, I'm just putting it in the areas where I'm going to begin shading with the lightest color on my orange pumpkin that'll be on the bottom. And any areas that you want to remain white, you're gonna make sure that you do not get water in those areas. So as you can watch, what I'm doing here is, again, just putting clear water on the page, and then in a moment I'm gonna add some yellow. That'll be the first color, and it's only gonna go into the areas where I've applied water. You'll also notice that I'm going to work on one pumpkin at a time. So I'm going to start with my bottom pumpkin, which will be my orange one. Then I'm going to do the top one, which will be blue. And then I will end with the one in the middle, which will be green. And I'm going to do that so that my colors don't run together. So it'll give my bottom pumpkin time to dry while I work on the other two. Now that I have all the water where I want it on my orange pumpkin, I'm going to start with a layer of sun yellow. And as you apply your color, you'll notice how it blends out into all of the wet areas on your page. It's really beautiful. Allow that color to organically blend out. Don't force it too much. You'll notice that I lightly just kind of touch it to the paper, but the paper and the water is really doing most of the work. When you do the wet on wet technique, you're just kind of applying the color to the areas that are already wet. My second color is going to be mango. So while my pumpkin, which is currently yellow, while it's still wet, I'm going to start adding that mango, and I'm only going to add it to the places where I want darker shading to occur. So this is when I'm combining the yellow and the mango color, this is what's going to give my orange pumpkin a really bright, pretty orange color. When I work with watercolor, I work from light to dark. So remember, we started with yellow, we're gonna do mango, and then we'll go to an even darker red in a moment. But always keep that in mind. That's a good thought to keep. So you wanna consider where your whites are gonna be, and then work from your whites all the way to your darkest colors in your color palette. So now that I'm done with my mango layer, I'm going to start applying the bright orange hue from the color palette. This entire palette is super vibrant, and I love that about it because it offers colors that allow you to have a really high contrast, so shading can be beautiful, but they don't really get muddy. They stay vibrant, and they just keep your paintings just really pretty and fun. Also, it's worth noting that as I add the bright orange layer, my pumpkin is actually still quite wet on my paper. So this is still the wet on wet technique that we're doing. As I add each layer, I am adding some more water to the page because the water's on my brush as well. So this entire time we've been doing the wet on wet technique. That's important because this technique really helps you blend colors, and at the end, when everything dries, you'll just have these really nice gradients in your painting. So now I'm going to add my final color to my orange pumpkin. I always use dark plum for shading. It's such a pretty color. It's really deep, and it actually works well with a whole lot of colors. So you're going to notice that I'll use this for shading on all three of my pumpkins. So I'm just going to add it to the darkest areas. You don't want to add too much. My pumpkin is still a little bit wet. It's not as wet as it was before, but it's wet enough that I have some blending happening as I add the color. And you just want to make sure to be really precise with this and make sure to get it up underneath where the other pumpkin is sitting so that you can create that really intense shadow. And then to give my pumpkin a little bit of texture, I'm going to use the burnt yellow ochre, and I'm just going to splatter it. So I use a bit bigger brush. It's still a round brush, but it's larger than the other one. And you're just going to put some water on it. You're going to get a little bit of that pigment on there, and then I just use my finger to kind of almost flick the color onto the page. You want this to be like scattered and natural. So now we're going to let our orange pumpkin completely dry before we do anything on the bottom of the painting. And we're going to move to the top and start working on our blue pumpkin. I'm going to speed this part up a little bit for you guys because it's the exact same steps that we used below for the orange pumpkin. So step 1 is just adding that clear water to your paper, and remember to keep any of your highlights dry. So anywhere on this pumpkin that you want to stay white, make sure to keep those areas completely dry. And then I'm going to start with an application of this really pretty mid ultramarine. And again, just let that first layer of color just bleed out really naturally into the water that you've already applied to the paper. Next, I'm going to add just a little bit of turquoise. Don't add too much of this or else your pumpkin will start looking turquoise. But if you add just a little bit, it'll make it, I don't know, just pretty. It adds a hint of green to your blue pumpkin, which to me makes it look a little bit more natural. And then here I'm going to start adding a darker blue. It's called bright blue. It's right next to the mid ultramarine on the palette, and I'm going to start adding this to my shaded areas. And then finally, I'm going to use navy blue to add some really dark shadowing to my little blue pumpkin. And now to finish off my little blue pumpkin, I'm just going to use some of that mid ultramarine and do the splatter method again, just to add a bit of texture. So now I want to give my blue pumpkin some time to dry, and since my orange pumpkin is, well, it should be dry at this point, I'm going to add a really dark shadow underneath just to ground my little stack of pumpkins. So I'm going to start with the wet on wet technique, and I'm going to add some clear water underneath that pumpkin. And the great thing about the Derwent Inktense set is that these colors dry and then they are permanent. So don't worry about muddying your colors at all. So if you get a little bit of water on your orange pumpkin, it'll be okay because it should be permanent if you're using this set. So now that I've got the water on there, I'm going to start with some of that mid ultramarine, so that lighter blue color. I'm just going to let that blend in. And then, like I said before, I really love the dark plum for my darkest shadowing, so I'm going to use that here as well, just to really help ground my little stack of pumpkins. And to finish off that shadow, I'm going to add just a little bit of texture and dimension with the navy blue. And I'm just going to leave, I'm going to let this blend in naturally and just leave a couple little dots there. Again, this just adds a bit of dimension to that dark shadow. Now that my blue pumpkin and my orange one are both dry, I can start working on the center green one. So again, same steps as the other two. I'm going to start with adding the clear water to my page. Keep the white parts of your pumpkin dry. And once you're done with that, you're just going to add a first layer of super light green to begin adding the color. I've got all my water where I want it, and now I'm going to start with my first layer of kiwi. I know this might look a little yellow, but we're going to add some darker greens to this, and it's really going to help make the final pumpkin look really natural. This color is just going to add a really bright, fun underlayer. And next, I'm going to use the mid ultramarine again. This is just going to give my green pumpkin a bit of a cooler color rather than a warm yellow green. Make sure to use this sparingly. You don't want this pumpkin turning blue. So just a little bit, just add it into the areas where you're going to have some shadows. And for the darkest darks on our green pumpkin, we're going to use one of my favorite colors. It's called Racing Green. This is a really, really nice, deep green hue. Similar to the dark plum, I use it very often for shadowing purposes. Hopefully, as you work through this tutorial, you'll get more familiar with and comfortable with the wet on wet technique. It can be a little bit difficult in the beginning because you're trying to control the amount of water and how much your pigment is running. But as you do this more and more, you'll get more comfortable with it, and you'll learn that you can have a really nice amount of control, but also end up having some beautiful organic washes in the end. Finally, to finish off our cute little stack of pumpkins, we're gonna paint the stems. So I'm gonna start with the burnt yellow ochre, and you'll notice that I actually did a wet on dry technique here. So that means that my brush was wet and I had some pigment on there, but my paper was not wet at all. So I'm gonna apply this first layer of this burnt yellow ochre, and then I'm gonna add my shadowing to that. So I'm going to use the natural brown. I'm just going to add that to wherever I want my shadows to be. And this is where it's really going to matter if you're using a brush that has a really fine tip on it. So pumpkins they have these beautiful vines and these little curlicue stems on them. So when you're doing details like this, it really helps to have a natural brush that has that really fine tip. If you're using your water brush from the Inktense set, that also has a very fine tip, and I will often use that for paintings such as this. So you can definitely try using that one, and you're probably going to be really successful with this painting if you only use that brush. And here you'll see how I'm going to finish my second stem the exact same way that I did the first. So I'm just going to apply that first layer using the wet on dry technique, and then I'll add my shading. Finally, to complete this, we're going to go back to our dry green pumpkin in the middle and add just a little bit of splatter to give it some texture. And then once you're done with that, you are finished with your little stack of pumpkins. And that's it. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope that you were able to learn something from this tutorial. I would love to see your paintings and hear your comments, so please reach out. Happy painting! Bye!